is much, much, much larger.
Very difficult to age tracks in sand. But lions. He or she going up and down here. This track's coming back this way, track's coming up this way. You said you wanted to find a lion track.
Just slowly walk back. Possible that you could be denning here.
You know, people have this initial sort of concern about sleeping out in the bush and being responsible for a group of trailists. You know, often we get people who feel so much gratitude, who feel so much privilege. People that feel all this privilege to be in the bush express it, you know, and it's a beautiful thing to watch them appreciate it. These people who acknowledge it as privilege relative to someone like myself in any guide's position who's in the bush regularly, who is going on lots of game walks and sleeping out in the bush, starts to or remembers that this is an environment that we evolved in, that we were among all these animals in the African bushveld for the entire length of our evolution, and remembering that we're a part of this environment opposed to feeling privileged to get to spend time in it again is the perspective I think that we try to present on a sleep out. You know, being out there in nature and feeling this fear is inevitable. Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to have that conversation with a person when you get to see them start to listen to how they remember themselves, or at least the spark in the back of their mind that reminds them that this is home. This is where we belong. And every day that you are out in the bush is one day closer to something happening, to something potentially going right or going wrong. So yeah, there's definitely been a few encounters or interesting experiences.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I think it's the right time, because the right and the wrong, or I'll even throw it in now, the perspective that we shouldn't be there, which you've touched on, that we shouldn't be there and that we're interfering by being there, and that none of these things that go a little bit wrong should be going wrong because we shouldn't be there in the first place. That pressure coming onto us as guides, saying, why are you putting yourself in these situations?
When you start off as a trails guide, you're taught by, you know, the governing figure, the Fagaza, their standards. You're taught to remain inconspicuous, perhaps, to the game. You know, you go out there, and the ideal encounter is to experience an animal on foot and to leave that situation on foot without interrupting that animal's day. So you can understand that lesson, to go and to experience, to continuously check the wind and to be involved with your surroundings, to not interfere with that animal's day and to move out. But then there's the relative perspective. We're a part of this system. Almost, 95% of the time, these animals are in fear of who I am, this small individual who has, I guess, the sins of his ancestors through hunting and maybe interrupting the days of these animals. So it's definitely, sustained through their DNA. So I think that our approach to an animal on foot and it being afraid of us, and then the perspective of us having interrupted their days, in fact, just an inevitable outcome of the history of man. And I think that we need to be less sensitive about our interactions with game. If I'm walking out in the bush, I'm there because I'm there. I'm not there because I'm trying to avoid everything out there. I'm there to have the experience of, I guess, the natural environment.
Tell us about some of those days you've interrupted.
Sometimes you don't even know you're interrupting something. A lot of the time you could be walking or not walking and sitting, for example, and something happens to bump into you or you bump into it. We walked west out of the river here, and there was a report on the radio, on the phone that morning, of a gorgeous bush shrike falling down river here, which is not a species we get to enjoy too much. One of them said to me, okay, how about you find us a lion track? How about just the lion track? That'll do. So we walked west looking for this gorgeous bush shrike in my mind, and very quickly found ourselves on a lion trail. And it wasn't ideal to interpret because we were in the sandy river and it was difficult to age the track or to find its details to expose. And so I just trailed it for a while until I did acknowledge to my guests that we're on a lion trail right now. Started to settle the guests into the atmosphere of how, our behavior of this trail is going to change, because I'm feeling influenced that this is maybe fresher than I'd previously imagined. and I saw that these tracks had walked then into like a riverine thicket that I have in the past avoided. But I was on the trail, and I think for some of us, and most will understand who are in the industry of a trails guide, it's sometimes difficult to pull yourself away from that track. And I had a small group, so we followed the trail and took it very slow. And eventually I found a lion track that had just changed everything. It changed everything about what was happening on that walk. And it was the definition, the way that this print had hit that sand in a loose substrate, immediately pulled me back and spoke to the guests about, because Annalise was the lady, she wanted to see this fresh lion track. So I told her he wanted to see this lion track. And as I did that, I turned my back away from the lead position. I turned around to interpret this track. And as I turned, if there was a warning, I didn't hear it. There was a lioness who came out the bush behind me, probably at a distance of about 10 meters. I know because I reevaluated that place. I went back and checked, which I think is good for a trails guide to debrief himself. But about 10 meters, she comes out the bush, and I didn't have too much time to do too much. But my reaction was just to turn around. I immediately chambered around, and it was just the training that kicked in, that muscle memory took over, and she turned at about 4 or 5 meters. And at the point that she was there, if she had made the decision to follow through with her charge, I wouldn't have been able to, or at least, I guess, do what I think any guide would prefer not to do, which was make a decision on a fatal behavior. But she turned her charge. Luckily, there was something about the way she came out the bush that spoke to me about how I needed to give her space. I remember saying to my guests, I think that she's denning here. And I'd never dealt with a denning lioness before this charge. But the way and the velocity at which she came out that bush and approached me was evidence enough to tell me that she needs space. So let's stop and stand still, because she's here. We've given her space. Let's see what happens. So we did that. And what I found interesting was when I extracted the round and made my rifle safe, as that metallic sound of the bolt closed, she didn't like that sound. So she came again. She came a second time, and she was a bit louder this time, but she didn't pursue the charge as much. So we just thought that, she's decided to warn us a second time, which is more than enough. Generally, you don't get a second warning, and just extracted ourselves from the situation, retreated, and fortunately had a lovely end to the walk without any more aggression. I remember when I came into the bush and started to be a trails guide, even a guide in general, most of your peers, everyone asks you, your boss, how's your trees doing? How's your birds doing? Your knowledge on the mammals and ecology, geology, all the modules that we tend to learn, that we're brought into this industry with trying to understand, trying to know it all. And you focus on it. It's what you're told to do. What tree is Jackalberry sitting under? What is this Latin name, for example? There's a bunch of crotons around us. This is a river system and all the networks and such that feed it. But when I go down to KZN, my home province, which unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, I have not yet explored enough, I feel like a kid again. If I go up to the Lekalametsi Nature Reserve, I feel like a child. I'm running around not knowing what the trees are called. I'm feeling like I'm in this wilderness environment, and I do feel like that here, but I think I've boxed a lot of the categories, and it's not something I intend to do with anyone who chooses to come on a walk with me. I'd like to maintain a sense of curious wonder, and I'd like to know what you think about what we're doing and what you think about the environment, because although things are studied, I think even study is subjective. We're out here to watch and to learn, and I think the only way to learn is to watch.